fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shirin.
And it is the last week of November.
Yeah,
and it's the last week of our coverage of Dark Fantasy Month. So we're going to close things out by having a conversation that I guarantee many people have had before about fantasy in general and dark fantasy, and posit the question, is anyone able to write fantasy stories that are not series? Like, is anybody able to write standalones? How many people are able to do that? And which ones are actually good?
And if you haven't asked yourself this question yet, I can guarantee you that now you will You're going to
be like, holy shit, everything that I pick up and everything that I read is the start of like at least a 4-book or more series.
Oh yeah, you can't get away with less than 3, I would say.
No, ma'am. No, it's got to be at least a trilogy. You can find the occasional duology every once in a while, which is
but
great.
Each one is like 1,000 pages long.
Probably, but also, I mean, I guess it is good to a certain extent that, you know, people have the option, at least a little bit sometimes in the fantasy sphere now, of like, we have a few duologies, and you do have, like, we're exaggerating, you do have like some standalone options, but they are fewer and far between, especially if you're looking for like a darker fantasy story, something that falls into that sphere of dark fantasy. I challenge you to go out there and find a pretty decent number of standalone novels. So,
well, before getting into that, Megan, what's on your nightstand?
I just finished a werewolf story.
Oh, you love werewolves.
Which was really fun. I just finished Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison, which she's also, I know her newest book that's just been published this year, Black Sheep, is getting like a lot of really positive response. And I have picked up her other book that she's written about witches called Cackle, which I haven't gotten around to, but that's also on my list of stuff to read. Just like solid werewolf in a small town story, and like about like very female centric, like almost all female characters, very like much more about like sort of like sisterhood and working with each other and dealing with that in like a really cool way that I wasn't expecting it to be. But I really, like, you know what, I enjoyed it. It was a fast read. It was well done. The characters were cool, a little bit quirky, but also like realistic. It has like a little bit of like a nihilistic viewpoint on a few things, but given, you know, the subject matter, like some of it's pretty dark. So there are like some trigger warnings regarding like childhood sexual assault and things like that in there that are covered, just in case you would want to pick it up, just so that you know there is some stuff that's discussed that's not very comfortable to read. However, just like the idea of, you know, like the transformation at like a turning point in someone's life, kind of like everything that comes along with that. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I really want to read her other books as well, because they were just like, it was like a cool, fun read to get through. I really liked it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so there we go. That's more, unfortunately, that falls more into the horror sphere of things as far as standalone books are concerned. Such Sharp Teeth kind of falls into that. Doesn't really fall so much into the fantasy side as
it's
much.
a werewolf.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But a lot of, so much werewolf stuff feels very urban. And like, if you don't.
Like a metaphor.
Yeah, because I find werewolf stories, if there are no other supernatural and or magical type creatures in it, it feels more horror and less fantasy as soon as you take those aspects away. If there are no witches
or vampires
doing anything, or other types of like creatures like in the whatever, like in the place and like that they're dealing with. So like, you know, because you can argue that something like the Sookie Stackhouse series, like the True Blood series, you can argue that those are part horror, part mystery, part dark fantasy, because there are so many different types of creatures that exist in throughout the course of all the stories. So you can kind of argue that one's a little more fantasy, whereas I find this fell much more into the horror. It just happens to be that the lead is attacked and bitten by a werewolf and then goes through her own transformation. So
interesting.
Anyway, I think we started talking about this because we'd had this conversation where it was like, what are these like fantasy books that we should read? And almost everything that anyone ever recommends or that you've ever recommended to me is the start of a series.
Which annoys Megan.
Fucking hell. My God, every once in a while I just want a goddamn standalone book, guys. Like, it's not, yes, series can be really fun. Obviously, I get it. in a lot of cases, yes, there's an easy answer to this question because it's fantasy, and so there's a lot of world building involved.
And character development.
Character relationship development, because we were talking in a previous episode about Spice Factor.
And
so you've got
romance.
Yes. So you have to get into that aspect of things as well, but like, oh my goodness. When it's like every single one of them, well, this one has 6 books, this one has 8 books. I'm like, oh my God, guys.
It's just hilarious because Megan and I have very opposing views on this. Like, if there's a series, it's almost like a TV series. Like, I don't like getting into anything that has any less than like 3 seasons because I know that I'm going to get like hooked on it.
Whereas I'm like, I really want to watch a movie.
Yeah.
A movie that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. I fucking love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Same thing with my book series. I'm like, oh man, there's not 3 and more books in this
And meanwhile,
series?
what happened,
Like,
I just read a book about werewolves that like you could have continued it. There could have been something else, but it was wrapped up. It was good. The story ended. And I was like,
happy.
I really liked that book.
Whereas I always feel like there's something missing. And I think that brings us to one of the only authors who does this exceedingly well.
Yes.
And that would be Neil Gaiman.
Yes.
We
love you, Neil Gaiman.
I love his writing. I love his books. I think because they are, in my opinion anyway, in my case, because they're standalone, I'm left thinking about them a lot for a long time afterwards.
That's fair.
So like one that comes to mind is Neverwhere that he wrote.
Oh, Neverwhere? I haven't read Neverwhere.
It's
Neverwhere,
excellent.
by the way, if you like look at stuff and you want something like what's like a cool dark fantasy cover of a book, Neverwhere has the coolest fucking covers. I've seen like 2 or 3 different versions and they're all nice. It's ridiculous.
Well, Neverwhere is the story of a guy who meets this girl one day. He's living his life. He's like some sort of like financial analyst or something in London. He's got like a very like mundane life. He's about to get engaged to his girlfriend who's kind of horrible. And he meets this girl. She's injured and he brings her home to his place to take care of her. And lo and behold, because she is from a fantasy world, his life gets erased. So it's as if he never existed.
Oh, weird.
And he's in his apartment and the realtor comes in and starts showing the apartment to other people. And like everybody's forgotten about him. Nobody knows who he is. And so he has to figure out where this girl came from and like follow her to, the other side of like the tube, basically. It's like kind of like an upside down world almost.
Oh, interesting.
It's really, really good. And like he does this with a lot of his novels.
Yeah.
Like think of, we were talking about Coraline and another
in a previous episode. Yeah.
We mentioned the Graveyard Book.
I mean, even you could push things to a certain extent because it does kind of fall into a fantasy. Stuff like American Gods kind of falls into that as well. That's an actual book I have actually read.
Yep.
Good Omens also falls into that because you've got your demon and angel thing going on as well.
Stardust.
I haven't read Anansi Boys, but I think that that's like very much, again, like gods, like along that same line.
It's with a character from American Gods.
Yes.
Is in that one,
Yeah. Mr. Nancy.
Mr. Nancy.
Yeah, exactly. That's more of like a god, I believe, from like African folklore
in
particular, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know the specifics of it, but I believe that that's partially like where he gained inspiration for that. And he does, Neil Gaiman really likes to revisit mythology and folklore of old, which he does with American Gods, which he does with Anansi Boys, which he does with Sandman, which
that is a series.
Yes, and what was his more recent one? Norse mythology, where he did it was an anthology of several retellings of Norse mythology, which is also touched upon to an extent in American Gods because Odin and Loki are included in that story as well. And he also has books like The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which is also very fantasy as well.
That's with Terry Pratchett, isn't it?
I don't
Was
remember.
that the one he wrote with Terry Pratchett?
I don't think so.
No, it's not. Sorry, my bad.
No, that's Good Omens, I believe,
That's
actually.
Good
Is
Omens
co-written.
he
Yeah,
wrote
co-written with Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
That's Good Omens. Also really fun. I haven't watched the second season of that show yet, but I need to.
No, I haven't either.
It's so good because I have a thing for David Tennant. So.
But I love him, and is it Michael Sheen?
It's Michael Sheen.
Yeah, like how they kind of
They're
play off each other.
incredible. They're so great.
But even like I find that whenever they adapt any of Neil Gaiman's books into like a show or a movie, they do such a good job with it.
I don't know. Is it because he tends to be very involved
I think
in what's
so.
going on? I don't know. I don't know what it is. Like like, because it's like the films have been good overall. The shows, I mean, well, okay, American Gods went kind of off the rails.
I mean, it started off really
that
well,
first season
though.
was fucking fantastic,
And
but
the
my
casting was great.
Yes, but my understanding is that there was a lot of behind the scenes trouble with showrunners being changed, potentially Neil Gaiman not being allowed to be as involved as he wanted to be in the process, because I think that he made certain comments about that at the time, and I think it showed in like I don't even think I watched the third season, but the second season was weird.
Yeah, I think I stopped around halfway through the second season when you started to really see that switch.
Which for me, that's like a really weird thing for me to have done, because like I had really loved the first season, and like Ian McShane and all of like the different characters that they had established. Crispin Glover.
Was in it. Yeah.
Why would I ever stop watching something that Crispin Glover is in?
Yeah.
Exactly. It makes no sense at all. And like Kristen Chenoweth was in the first season. And then Gillian Anderson popped up and stuff. And these were like interesting. Yeah, she was like a pop culture god or something. You know, she's Marilyn Monroe sometimes, and like David Bowie, and like different like things like that. That's how she presents herself. Anyway, why would I ever stop watching something like that? But the story just went like fucking crazy. It was weird.
But also, it comes back to the fact that American Gods was a standalone.
It was one novel.
Book.
I know.
It was one novel. And so by the end of it, it was like wrapped up in a bow, and everything was taken care of. Yeah. However, they decided to make a TV series with it. And like by the end of the first season, I think they were almost at the end of the book there.
They were very close, because Odin had revealed himself. Yeah. Mr. Wednesday had revealed himself, and all of that kind of stuff had happened.
And they were about to have the big battle, you know?
No, it's true. I think over 2 seasons probably wasn't a great idea. Yeah. Even though they really, like, I will commend them. They did a really great job in adding the gods that they did to the show. Like, you know, that's it. Crispin Glover, Mr. World, didn't exist in the novel. And the technology god...
Mr. World existed in the novel. He didn't? There was someone.
No, there were, it was more like properly already established gods, because American Gods was written back in the 90s.
Right. Okay.
And Mr. World is a god of globalization.
Right.
So he's a little bit different and a little bit more modern. So he was added for the series. The technology god, that kid, was added for the series as well. He didn't exist in the book.
Oh, I thought there was something.
No, they touched more upon that. So it was like, so they did this really cool, really smart thing in adding these like very relevant gods, and adding them, that's it, as the idea of like, here are the new gods, and this is what they're gods of now, because that's what people care about now. Media, that's it. Gillian Anderson was media. Thank you. I completely forgot what she was called. Yes.
But again, like, it was a standalone, whereas if you look at like Sandman...
Well, Sandman is an entire...
That's a whole...
series of graphic novels.
Right.
Yeah.
And they've made a Netflix show for Sandman, which
I like it. I thought it was quite good.
I think there's 2 seasons out.
I think there's only one. I think only one for now, but I know that they're making a second season. Coming. Yeah, they're making a second season.
And that one would be easy to continue, because there's enough to go on.
And again, overall they do a good job when they do this, where that's it, since, you know, a lot of the novels, or graphic novels in this case, were published like a while ago, they're still smart enough to include certain more modern touches for a modern audience. So in the Sandman series, that's what we saw with some of the other deities who are introduced, like the 7 deadly sins. There are ones that are introduced. Which one is it who's a non-binary character? I figured if it's Lust or something else.
I think it's Lust.
I believe so, because again, that's it. Like, Lust doesn't need a gender necessarily. No. They can be, whatever. Yeah. So it was like, like that's a really interesting thing. Obviously making Lucifer more like female identifying.
That was interesting too.
Having Gwendolyn Christie play that character and not have her be like horn and pitchfork and stuff like that. She just looks like a person. And she's blonde. She's like dressed in white all the time. So like kind of circumventing that expectation a little bit too, and kind of like what they do with the characters. Anyway, it's cool. It's really interesting, and it does work. It does tend to work pretty well. But I can see that in certain cases, if it's not a series, they would have a hard time keeping it going.
Right. And, back to our topic, there are so many of them that are series, you know,
God.
And we've seen in recent years that there's been this like first of all, we were talking about it in a previous episode. Dark fantasy has had this like resurgence, you know, this modernization, if you will, evolution of the genre. And with that has come a lot of TV series because it makes sense, right? Like we've got a lot of streaming services now.
Yeah.
So for them, it's in their best interest to make like shows and TV series. And so, you know, you see it a lot. Like it kind of goes hand in hand. If you're a reader who enjoys, like me, I love a series of books, so I love a TV series.
Because it goes along with it, with each other. That makes sense. It does make sense, you know, but I find that, like, when you go looking for it, you're like, okay, I want something fantasy, and I want something fantasy and a little bit darker, but I want it to be just one book, like... you can count them on one hand kind of thing, as opposed to a series where it's just almost like a never-ending number of books that are published. Like, you know, if I'm looking even right now through like a couple of lists of like standalone and still kind of darker fantasy, you've got stuff like The Night Circus.
Oh, yeah.
By Erin Morgenstern, which kind of like, you know, also kind of like, yes, it's like a newly created world to a certain extent because of The Night Circus just kind of arrives out of nowhere, generally speaking, but it almost feels like it's sort of rooted in reality to an extent.
Right.
So I think that's what happens with a lot of those. Like, look at what we're talking about, things like Coraline and American Gods and stuff. These are things that are rooted in the real world, but there are deities or supernatural beings that exist in that real world.
And that would, you know, that would kind of cut some of your I don't know, page time, if you will, you know, if you're not building a whole world. However, he does do it in Stardust. Neil Gaiman creates like a whole world in Stardust, and he does that as a standalone novel as well.
Yeah, that's true, right?
So it is possible.
Yeah, it is possible. It just doesn't seem to be a regular thing. And I'm sure that some of that probably comes from like publishers to an extent as well. I'm sure that a lot of the time if people are being signed, they're being signed for, you know, a 3-book deal, multiple books in some way, shape, or form.
Especially if it's a good idea, you know, like something fresh and new.
Yeah, because you can develop a lot out of that, right? Because God, if you start looking, you're like, dark fantasy is just series. Everywhere. It's series forever. It's series from Holly Black. It's series from Sarah J. Maas. It's series from Cassandra Clare. It's series from, what's her name, Scarlett St. Clair. And it's just,
Jennifer Armentrout.
Oh, it's wild. It's just nuts. It's just all of them. Also, we'll say a lot of these dark fantasy types of series that are the most popular are written by women. A lot of them.
And a lot of the time, from what I've noticed, the main character is a woman. And what I love about it is that, I mentioned it in one of our previous episodes, is that she's a woman who is not acting like a man. She's a woman who can be emotional, can be her woman-y self, and she's still getting shit done, and she's still tough, and she's still powerful.
Yeah,
you know?
but she has emotion.
Yeah.
Actually, no, it's true. I think that... I think there are, I guess to answer the question that we're kind of asking in this episode, is it possible? I mean, yes, it's possible, but it is unlikely to happen simply because because there's like a world that needs to be established and built up, and there are characters who need to be developed, and also, you know, having more than one book in a series gives you the opportunity as an author to introduce new characters throughout the course of that as well, to kind of like keep things interesting as well. So it's not just following the same like 3 or 4 characters all the time and having that be the end of it. And I do think even that's it, like popularization of more adult fantasy that is of a darker tone. You know, like Game of Thrones and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Those types of...
But that, I would argue, is like high fantasy.
It is high fantasy, but I feel like it's high fantasy with a dark twist to it, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Feels darker than Lord of the Rings to me, anyway.
I think it's all in the writing style.
Yeah.
Because if you put them as, like, if you said to somebody who has only watched the movies and the show, you know, which one is darker, Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, like, obviously Game of Thrones, there's a lot more violence, and, like, you can see that the characters...
Like, darker subject matter to an extent.
Yeah, like, the characters are, like, pretty evil in Game of Thrones. Yeah. But a lot of the time, it's, like, evil just for the sake of, like, just kind of trying to one-up somebody from a political standpoint.
Kind of, yeah.
And And whereas, like, you know, you watch Lord of the Rings, like, it's also very dark. Like, it's, you know, doom and gloom. We're going to die if we don't destroy this ring.
Yeah.
However, if you go and you read the two, which I have and you have.
I haven't much, to be fair. But
Yeah, I've read both of those in total, in their entirety. And the writing style of Tolkien, again, early 1900s when he was writing, is very, like, jaunty almost.
Yeah, so it's like, there's really serious stuff happening, but we're going to have tea about it.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Like, it's okay because we're encountering this elven queen in a tree. And you're like, what?
She'll certainly help us. And you're like, what? Yeah, what?
What?
Happening?
Whereas you watch the movies and it's like, do.
Yeah, the score definitely adds a lot of a much, much, much darker atmosphere to, like, what's going on. Because, there are many in the films. There are many darker moments like that. And a lot of it is the way it's filmed. It's the production design. It's the score. It's the acting.
They did a great job with those movies.
Yeah, that's it. It's all of those sorts of things that make it a little bit more like that. Yeah, I think that's the end of it. I've decided that Neil Gaiman is a master of writing standalone fantasy novels. Thank you very much. Keep doing what you're doing because it is nice to have the option on occasion. And I would really love to know if people have good recommendations of, like, standalone dark fantasy. If you've got them, I want to know. I'm really curious. I would like be really interested in knowing, like, who, like, the authors are, what the story is about, and kind of how they manage to tie everything together and wrap it up in a neat little bow by the end of a book.
Yeah, please give her some recommendations.
Give me some
trying
recommendations.
to get her to finish a fantasy series is like pulling teeth.
It's just because
I need to talk about it to someone.
Oh my God. It's just because you need me to read the entire series right away. And I'm going to get through it, but I'm just not going to get through it at the pace that you need me to.
I just will not care as much by the time you finish.
Yeah, I'll finish in like 2 years and you'll be like, oh, fucking whatever. I'm halfway through the Crescent City ones now.
I feel like we forgot about that one. We're on to something else.
We're on to something else, Megan. You'll have read like 3 other series and I'll be like, okay, well, I'm not reading all of that.
Pick your favorite.
This is why I read horror.
Yeah.
They finish a book, guys. You know how to finish horror. Yeah, we know how to finish a book. Thank you very much. Good job, horror. You guys are great.
You are embodying the horror genre now.
You guys know how to finish a story in one fell swoop, and I really appreciate it. But yeah, if you guys have dark fantasy recommendations for series or standalones, it's fine. You can let us know about that over on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at fullybookedca. And you can also check out our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/book was way better. And if you've been with us for this whole month and you're enjoying yourself, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you are listening. But until next week, guys, and a whole new slew of episodes, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.